city of New Orleans accuses the federal consent decree monitor of political motivations.
Yeah, it comes after a report from the monitor slammed the NOPD's handling of an investigation into Officer Jeffrey Vappie, a former member of Mayor Cantrell's security team. Here's our latest outside the office investigation. The federal consent decree monitor says the NOPD's approach toward its investigation into Officer Jeffrey Vappie reflects a cavalier attitude toward the Public Integrity Bureau's obligations and the importance of officer accountability. The consent decree monitor says the NOPD's internal investigation failed to consider potential payroll fraud and a potential personal relationship between Vappie and the mayor, and the NOPD should have aggressively pursued an interview with Mayor Cantrell.
The issue here is that while the PIB did an investigation and found violations, I don't think they went far enough in their overall investigation, looking at the larger issues of payroll fraud.
Our outside the office investigation found Vappie spent long hours inside the city-owned Upper Pantaba apartment with Mayor Cantrell, both on and off the clock. In some instances, leaving late at night, even past midnight. Attached to the consent decree monitor's report is the actual Public Integrity Bureau investigation into Vappie. The NOPD completed the report on March 10th, but still hasn't released it to us, even though we filed a public records request more than a month ago for it on May 4th. The completed Public Integrity Bureau report shows the NOPD sustained 3 violations into NOPD Officer Jeffrey Vappie. The PIB report says Vappie violated a performance of duty rule when he worked for more than 16 hours and 35 minutes on several days. PIB investigators also say Vappie violated a rule of professional conduct when he spent numerous hours alone with Mayor Cantrell outside of his regular tour of duty, which goes against the training and ethics he received. In fact, 2 officers brought this to Vappie's attention and told him to stop. The PIB report also finds Vappie violated a performance of duty rule when he attended 2 housing authority board meetings while being paid to protect the mayor. Our story showed Cantrell appointed Vappie to the Hano board, and he went to meetings while taxpayers paid him to work for the NOPD. The PIB investigation also details an interview with a longtime member of the executive protection team, Officer Luis Martinez. Earlier this year, we received several leaked audio recordings of the PIB investigation when NOPD investigators interviewed several officers, including Vappie.
Do you feel like he should come back?
I don't think so, no.
Why not?
It's a bad look.
What do you mean a bad look?
Just look bad.
To who? To you? To
everybody.
But the Martinez interview was not included in the leak. In the PIB report, Martinez told investigators he noticed Vappie's unprofessional behavior with Cantrell, saying there's a line you don't cross. Martinez says he asked Vappie if he crossed it, and Vappie said no. I took him at his word. Then Martinez said when he saw the video from our stories, he was surprised and hurt. The PIB investigation concluded that investigators were unable to confidently assess Vappie's credibility. Writing during his interview, Officer Vappie seemed confused about his work schedule rotation, antagonistic regarding his tactical positioning while dining with his protectee, and unable to articulate some of his duties when he was not assigned to his protectee. The investigators wrote Officer Vappie's unprofessional behavior with Cantrell caused a major embarrassment to the NOPD and discredits the hard work the other members of the executive protection team display. The investigating officers found beyond a preponderance of evidence Vappie violated NOPD rules and regulations, but the consent decree monitor says those findings didn't go far enough.
Did you ever believe that this would be a fair and a meaningful investigation just because of the nature of the conflicts here?
No, because of the sensitivity of the matter, because of the potential political implications, because of the positions of the parties involved, this investigation should have been done by a third-party agency that had no connection with the city of New Orleans.
Late today, the city of New Orleans filed a lengthy response accusing the monitor of being politically motivated and ignoring the evidence of the case. The filing says there was not sufficient evidence that Officer Vappie was not performing his duties while in the mayor's apartment to support by a preponderance of evidence that he was engaged in payroll fraud, adding it may look bad, it may be unprofessional, and it was in violation of his training. The city says there is no NOPD policy that prohibits detail members from being in the residence of the protectee. There is speculation about what he was doing, speculation the city says the monitor is unusually focused on. The city defended Vappie's time in the Puntaba and when he watered plants, writing that fits into the broad traditional roles of executive protection duties, even if not traditional police work. The city's response concluded with this: what the monitor refuses to accept is that there was insufficient evidence that Officer Vappie engaged in nepotism or payroll fraud, adding the PIB investigators refused to bow to this pressure, which is a testament to PIB. Concluding, but this revelation will cast a dark shadow over all future monitor involvement with the NOPD.
The city's response went on to add that a 3-captain disciplinary panel recommended that Interim Superintendent Michelle Woodfork sustain 3 of the 4 charges Vappie faced. It says discipline has been recommended, but does not say what that recommendation is. Late today, Department of Justice attorneys from the Civil Rights Division filed a response agreeing with the consent decree monitor, writing the United States agrees issues should be addressed, and asked whether NOPD has made a referral for a criminal investigation of Vappie, concluding the allegations are ones of serious misconduct, and asked the federal judge to require the city to respond to the outstanding consent decree compliance issue.